Hello, hello, welcome everyone to Classic Amateurs, a podcast where we try to convince each other that what we are reading is a classic. Raz, how are you doing?
Good. I definitely agree with our slogan. Another slogan would be "Why listen to us? Read it yourself." No, we try to curate the best classics out there for you, and also to introduce it to our friends. In this case, me introducing it to you, Norm.
Yeah, best classics that we read, not the best classics that are actually the best.
Arguable.
Yes. Anyway, what do you have for me today?
Yeah, well, actually, you're in for a treat today. I want to introduce you to one of my best friends, one of my most favorite authors, which is Nicholas Taleb. Have you ever heard of
Hmm?
Nicholas Taleb?
No, but I like the cover of that book.
Yeah, it's basically a cover of basically a guy that has the queen as a head. So basically, he's got skin in the game. Therefore, the title of the book, "Skin in the Game." He's not just playing the game; he is part of the game. That's that's
It's the
the
chess
gist of it.
reference queen, or what is it?
Well, it just refers to life in general, and I'll explain to you in a second what he means by skin in the game. But so this book, the reason why I think Nicholas Taleb is known, I'll do a quick intro on him, is that he's quite a fascinating character because he wrote this book called The Black Swan, which is an earlier book of his, which is now part of a trilogy called Inserto. So he writes these books. They're a combination of short stories, anecdotes, philosophy, science. Quite entertaining to read. Difficult to summarize, which will be very challenging for me today. And he started off
Are
with this.
we are we expecting like spaceships and monsters, or is this like real talk?
No, this is nonfiction. This is
I see.
how to. This is be aware of your kind
Wiki
of blind
how?
spots. Yeah, blind spots in life. How do you manage risk? How do you lead life well? How do you prepare for uncertainty? What is reliable knowledge? How do you deal in human affairs, like when it comes to fairness and symmetry? I do something and you do something, and sort of gouging the level of fairness and responsibility and reciprocity. The first point was around bullshit detection as well. So, how do you know when something is true or not? Another thing that he treats in this book is sort of information sharing in transactions, so transparency and how they enable successful dealings. And in general, anything that has to do with kind of rationality in kind of complex systems, what is rational, what isn't. It goes down. He's a Wharton educated ex trader. He used to trade bond derivatives, I believe, in the early 90s. That's where he made his money, his fuck you money, as he calls it. And after that, he retired and he became an academic at Wharton, only
Yeah.
to completely diss the entire academia, kind of a circle masturbation of quotations that is fueling reputation and success in academia, especially in the social sciences. So he's very critical of the scientific method in social sciences and in general in science today. And he's dispelling a lot of myths around normal distributions and which is quite technical that I'm still struggling to understand. But then I'll try to touch a little bit on probabilities later in this chat if you want. With my understanding.
Sounds like this guy is very well liked everywhere.
Oh, no one, everyone hates him.
He barges in, points his finger around, and calls everyone an idiot.
Well,
And
just like we spoke about Peter Thiel in a previous episode where we spoke about 0 to 1, a real contrarian. Tell me something that not a lot of people agree with. In this case, there are a lot of truths in this book that are hard to swallow. They're not for everyone. But the thing about the previous book that really built his reputation, The Black Swan, is I think he kind of called out the financial crisis in that directly or indirectly, I don't recall. So that's how he built his name, and he then built on that success with a series of books that explore the asymmetry in life and the that level questions around
wait, so
morality and
he
fairness.
wait, so he predicted the financial crisis?
I think so, something like that. Yeah.
So he did like a doomsday prediction. I feel like you're an idiot, but it turned out to be true. And he's like, oh, this guy might be,
Yeah.
onto
Now I don't
something.
remember anymore, and this is why it's called amateur classics. I don't remember if it was this financial crisis or a previous financial crisis. I'll need to Google
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
You
It's
can, if
also
you want
called
to,
classic amateurs, by the way, but it's an amateur mistake to mix it up.
amateur mistake to quote the wrong financial crisis. There've been so
Yeah,
many that you don't know whether it was the asset bubble of dot-com bubble, whether it's financial crisis related to real estate in 2008, or 1991 crisis related to oil prices. He definitely made his money in one of them, and he talked about the earliest one.
yeah, sure.
Anyway, so he's really big on he's not liked at all by academia, and he talks about the difference between academia and real world, saying that look, basically everyone in academia thinks that that's the real world, but the real world is the real world, and not the and there's
Do academics have the street talk, the hood?
yeah, oh
I
yeah,
think that's how they call it.
he's because he's kind of Lebanese, so you can imagine a Middle Eastern character, Christian nonetheless, but very Middle Eastern, meets a guy that's done trading in New York and loves the Brooklyn, and so he everything that the way he talks and his characters, because he builds these semi-fictional characters in his book that have dialogues, all have this kind of Brooklyn attitude, gangster attitude, street smart, not book
Yeah.
smart, and
Now you say, now that you say the Lebanese, I actually know a Lebanese guy who is massively Christian, and he
mm,
walks around with like his shirt unbuttoned on the top, like massive hairy chest, and this extreme cross hanging from his neck, and he's like so intimidating, but he's like the nicest guy. So that's how I imagine this guy now.
there you go. That's the so out of the book. Be that guy. No, I'm joking. You can be a bit more sophisticated. You can have your own nuance of that. But basically, the whole point is that he draws attention to something that is a kind of a disconnect between risk and reward. He calls out there's a lot of people out there spending like full of bullshit that encourage you to take specific risks, so such as banks, right? But then don't share the downside of that, right? They only share the upside, and that's why you see the too big to fail and the GFC and people getting banks getting bailed out. When in fact it was only normal that after a certain period of time of risk taking, there would be a kind of a reversion to the mean. Uh, and the people that were part of those systems did not actually see did not actually suffer the consequences of their own risk taking, and that's wrong. He's calling out
Give me
this
an
moral.
example here, because this feels confusing.
Well, no, I mean the people that were in, say, Goldman Sachs or someone else, right, in the global
No,
financial
like
crisis.
a practical example, like you go into the bank and you take a loan out, that sort of example.
Yeah, I mean, this is applied systemically, right? So the loan manager at a bank encourages me to take on a loan, even though I'm subprime, so I can't afford it. My level of indebtedness is, say, about 50%. The asset that I'm buying is a commodity which is overvalued in a speculative bubble, and he does this for 1,000 other people. He gets his commissions because he's attracted a large portfolio of customers.
Yeah.
There's a high default all of a sudden on the portfolio. That
Yeah.
that guy doesn't lose his job. Everyone else is screwed, including myself, because I have to move out of the house. I incur a lot of transaction costs, moving out, selling the home. I shouldn't have been given this loan to begin with. But he keeps his job. He keeps his bonus for selling in the first place, and he continues on with his life. And the bank itself, which made this huge loss that is larger than all the winnings that they've had in the previous 2 decades, let's say, and this is extrapolated to the whole financial system in the global financial crisis, it gets bailed out by taxpayers, so us again. So that's what he was calling out, is that the system is unfair, and there shouldn't be something like too big to fail, and this can be applied to a lot of things. Wherever there's kind of this rent seeking behavior, there's no downside to one's own actions, only the upside part.
Yeah.
That's wrong. And then you should be exposed morally. You're morally obliged to be exposed to the consequences of what you preach. And what truly matters is what you do, not what you say. So that full bullshit detection.
Sure.
So put your money
Walk
where
the
your
walk,
mouth
talk the
is.
talk. Yeah.
Exactly. That very simple things. So
Yeah, I mean that consistency is the reason why we are, drawn to groups, right? It's like if you join a bunch of vegans, but then you realize everyone is eating a steak every single day, you're like, wait, what's going on here?
mm,
Because being vegan doesn't mean you just talk about being vegan. It also means you are vegan, right? Anyway, don't want to interrupt you.
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I mean, this book is extremely dense and super difficult for me to summarize it. But I think it's always good to look at a book for the questions that it's trying to answer. And it's got a long list of questions that it's trying to answer. For instance, and it's not just, just not just scratching the surface. He goes down to the detail of why things really happen the way they do. For instance, why is it that the most intolerant minorities run the world and impose their tastes on us? Right? This is a very, very interesting question. I'll go into that
I
because
have
I
no
really
idea
find
what
it
that
fascinating.
means.
That actually, I never thought of it that
Minorities
way. And just
like Star Trek fans, or who are you talking?
in a way, maybe we can examine that as well. So,
Yeah,
what about?
those Star Trek fans.
So
Yeah,
another
go for it.
question is, what should your surgeon look like? Should he or she look like a surgeon, or is it better to actually go with someone that doesn't look at all like a surgeon? And why would that be the case? Or why do religions insist on the human side of Jesus Christ and on sacrifice in general? Why is that important? As you can see, he has quite a philosophical touch to things. And why is
I'm confused. I mean, I don't think I had a few surgeries, but I don't remember any of my surgeons. I know they normally put me to sleep before I see them, so I'm
I
not very
mean,
judgmental of my surgeons, to be honest.
I think it depends whether you're in a public or a private system where you do have a choice about the doctor you go with. If you want, I can
Okay,
go into that anecdote straight away. So
yeah, let's do
basically,
it.
I think what his point is in this case is simply that you have the choice between two people. One perfectly scrubbed, impeccable person, all the degrees on the wall. He looks like your typical, kind of Harvard educated doctor. I don't know. And
Huh?
and then on the other hand, in the similar position, you have a tired, maybe not, not your ethnically classical person, really worn down, maybe shabby, bad clothes. They all occupy the same position, right? As a status. Should you go with the clean, clean version, or should you go with the really worn down version, and why? I
Okay.
can answer. The point that he's trying to make is always go with the more the worn down person that occupies the same status, because that's an indication of kind of the sacrifices that that person had to make, and therefore his merit, of achieving that status. It's an indication of the skin in the game that person has had to achieve that level of competency, and it's a validation of
Yeah,
of his or her
that's
competence.
that's why I only deal with homeless people. I only give my money to homeless
That
people.
occupy a position of surgeon in a private hospital. Yeah, the other
Oh,
point
they
about
swear they are surgeons. Some of them think they are more than that. Some of them think they are presidents. So go for it.
another interesting point I was trying to hint at the beginning around the minority rule. Why is it the minorities rule the world? And you have this example, classic example with in the U.S. with kosher salt. All salt in
Wait,
the
wait, wait, wait,
U.S.
wait, wait, wait. Minorities is in like smaller groups. Like, is this like?
Yes, a minority defined as someone with a distinct taste for something or a strong preference for something that is different from the majority. So to give
Okay,
an
okay, fine.
example, just a simple classic example is kosher salt in the U.S. All Why is it that I don't know the stats exactly? Why is it that there's probably only like 0.3% of the U.S. population that is kosher, but all the salt in the U.S. is kosher, basically? And it's not a
Yeah.
conspiracy. It's simply
No,
because
no, that's fine.
of the strong preference of a minority group, which actually made it that they always required this, and therefore it was easier for companies to comply with kosher, making everything kosher, than having to satisfy the specific segment directly. This applies to many other things, and especially to the reason why religion and language, well, genetics and languages have this are kind of distributed themselves differently in the world. So genes follow kind of the majority rule. So if you have a
Yeah.
population of average distribution of genes, they will actually win over, take over. Whereas languages kind of follow the minority rule. If you have a specific group of people at some point, they they will actually impose they'll keep the minority language and actually impose it onto others. And this explains why Greek, for instance, was the language that spread throughout the Hellenistic world in antiquity. Um, it
I
was
guess
the
I guess
strength
it
of
it
that preference.
depends. Right. It also depends. Like with the kosher salt, like salt is salt, right? Most people don't care. But with like I'm thinking about like
That's
this
exactly the
story
point, is
about
that the fact that there's
yeah
a weak preference for the majority for a specific point, but a really, really strong preference by a minority makes them win. Another example of this is why religions took over. So actually, the Romans loved, they were okay with a lot of gods, including the Christian God. Christians came in and they were like, no, there's only one God. And then they were tolerated by the Romans up to the point at which they, through marriages and so on, the idea of a single god became pervasive, and it won over the Romans ultimately. And the
how
same thing,
cool would it be if we would still have the Roman gods, huh? Jupiter and Pluto,
it can be
Aphrodite.
reverted. Yeah,
All the young horny boys would be all about her, Aphrodite or Venus, whichever the Roman version was.
in a way, I think we do still keep some of those affinities. But
Sure.
interestingly, like Islam did the same thing, even more. So Islam is even more conservative than Christianity, and that explains why it won, say, in Egypt and other places where basically, if I think if you're Muslim and you marry, if you're not Muslim and you marry a Muslim woman, you're automatically have to convert to Islam. And then your child, one of the parents is Muslim, the child is automatically Muslim. It's also irreversible. You can't, if once you've done it, you divorce, you can't. So that ensured this pervasiveness and this dispersion of Islam through the I guess Middle Ages. The interesting thing is that, for instance, Judaism has that rule with only the mother has to be Jewish, and that
Yeah.
actually that loosening of the rule actually um, ensures that they only remain a very, very small population
Uh-huh.
relative to the other bigger
I mean,
religion.
I guess again, I think strong preference, weak preference is yeah, probably that's really the key there, because then you think about some of the New Age religions like Scientology and how how their habits are much more restrictive and much harder to follow. So if probably like majority of society wouldn't accept it, therefore it doesn't spread as fast. Maybe it doesn't even spread. I don't really know. I don't follow them, but it would be interesting to look at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. I mean, it's very hard to describe this book, just to continue on this point, without seeming like I'm jumping around a lot, because the book jumps around a lot and focuses on a lot of things. In the anecdote that I shared with you about the surgeons, I think he goes on to draw attention that there's a difference between correlation and causation. In general, if you believe someone has the right pedigree, looks really clean as a surgeon, that doesn't necessarily mean that he is incidentally also a good surgeon. It actually might be the other way around. The fact that he's a good surgeon allowed him the salary to be so well groomed, right? And another example that is extreme to this, and we spoke about before, is education. We often believe that, or it is believed that, the richer the country, the better the education system. But actually, the way you get there is not through education, because he really calls bullshit on the education system, which is extracting a lot of rents, right, through Ivy League education, which is extremely expensive, with indebted servitude through student loans at compounding interest that are not liable to bankruptcy laws. And he's saying, actually, if you look at the case of Switzerland, it's actually a vocational system that is highly decentralized, that is very much in tune with the labor market, that allows a country to be prosperous,
Sure.
in turn allowing it the luxury good of education. So education is a luxury good to some extent, and it's proven by the fact that a lot of new Asian upper class, and I'm quoting, see it as the ultimate status luxury good, getting into Ivy
Sure.
League education.
I mean, I guess if your degree is in medicine, that's one thing. But if your degree is in Lord of the Rings studies, which is apparently an actual degree, is different, right? It depends on the facet of education. But let me ask you this:
Hmm.
with with the education as well as with the doctor bit, like, how does he feel about standards? Like with, for example, with the doctor, with the surgeon. I mean, we all expect that most surgeons meet a certain standard unless you are Doctor Death. But other than that, majority of them will probably be able to do the surgery you are going through, right? So it doesn't really matter if they are well dressed or homeless looking. Same is with education. Like there's a certain level of curriculum that you feel that every institute will teach you. Obviously, if you want to have the network and you want to have the fame, you'll go for an expensive school. But other than that, do you feel like most people would have a strong consideration when it comes to like picking the education or surgeon or whatever?
Not sure I understand your question. You're saying that basically people have a certain level of standard when it
Yeah.
comes to choosing, and therefore that standard is guaranteed by the brand that is comes
Well,
with the
just
product, such as
just
Ivy League
assume. Yeah.
or.
No, not even that. Just it's unassumed, right? So with going back to the surgeon bit, you have 10 surgeons to choose from, anywhere, and the major difference between them is like the first one is the best dressed, and the last one is the worst dressed, and you see all the service level stuff, and he argues pick the worst dressed because he's the one that sacrificed the most. That was kind of like the argument
He's
he
the
put
one that's
forward, right?
virtue signaling the least. Yeah.
Sure, sure. In the same time, what I'm arguing is when you go to a surgeon, you enter an institution where the surgeon works, and you know that the institution, or you assume that institution, will hire that surgeon only if they know that the surgeon will be able to do the job. So, in the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if you choose number one, number two, or number 10, simply because they all have that standard already. Now, you can
Mm.
have personal preference, sure, but does it really matter?
Well, now
Does that
you're
make
saying
sense?
you're delegating your decision making to an institution. In this
Yeah,
case, the hospital has
yeah,
made the call. The Ivy
yeah,
League, Harvard has made the call on who to welcome in and who not. It's no longer
yeah.
my responsibility. As long as I
Well,
think,
in a
as
way,
long
yeah,
as you're comfortable with now you making the choice, delegating that you've made the choice around the institution, the overarching uh, entity representing that, and you're comfortable with that
yeah,
to some extent, probably you're distributing your risk to some extent, but
sure,
you need, I think the decision making process changes a little bit, and it's no longer
sure.
about the individual. It's
Yeah,
about
I
the
mean,
other
there's,
factors about
yeah,
that. It could be a very polished, branded. Look at McDonald's, right? McDonald's looks great, right? If you didn't know anything about their food, and yet it follows the same minority role in a way, because why does McDonald's exist even though the food is borderline edible, or it's tasty but then you feel crap afterwards, and it's because people tolerate it to some extent, to the point where if you had a choice between something you didn't know at all, very obscure, and the brand, you'd probably go for the brand, at least because you recognize the logo. If you're in a bad neighborhood, at least you know there's a minimum level of service to expect. And that's why McDonald's still exists in the world despite its poor quality. um,
almost like a stereotype, like an institutional level stereotype, right? It's like, yeah, like what you get from McDonald's. It's not necessarily the best thing you can get, but you know that you will definitely get it. Also, it's great drunk food. So drunk
there's always going to be a
or
market for
hangover
that, of
food.
course.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Um, yeah, just skimming through a little bit just to cover a few other points that I liked about the book, that are also surprising. Deeper into agency, it's the deeds that matter, not the words. Have you read The Godfather? Do you remember The Godfather?
No, no, I actually never watched Godfather. I know that's a
There's
blasphemy,
another
but
episode where we should talk about.
yeah,
There's a scene in The Godfather where a Hollywood executive wakes up next to the
that horse.
bloody decapitated, yeah, the horse, the head
Yeah,
of the decapitated
I know
horse.
about it. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's basically talks about how basically the element of violence and the threat of violence, how important it is for peacemaking, and you wouldn't expect it. And this dates back to, say, the assassins, and I think we've spoken about the assassins some other time, which was the assassins actually didn't really perform that many killings. What they actually did was, they went to, say, the sultans of the Sanjar or some other dynasty, and they just put a dagger on their nightstand at night, just as a friendly threat. And they knew that, peace was required, right? Because they had actually access to him
Sure.
directly. And this actually avoided a lot of violence. And so there was
Ah,
actually a
I didn't know that.
peacemaking element to the threat of violence. And he talks about assassination as marketing to some extent.
Wait. So assassins were basically just glorified postmen with very specific delivery.
They had
That's
excellent
awesome.
access to your home. Yeah,
Wow, what a great
drop
branding.
shipping, drop shipping.
Imagine that. Huh? Anyway, go for it.
No, I mean this is quite interesting. Just understanding that there's a difference between what you do and what you say, and then
Mm.
the most impactful communication is often nonverbal, and it has the ability to ensure peace across geopolitically, for instance. This the simplest gesture and something that we take for granted sometimes. And on the other hand, you hear a lot of noise about killings and assassinations and so on. And you find that people, I think it's proven scientifically to some extent, that people actually overinflate numbers quite a bit when it comes to massacres and genocide, but ultimately with the same purpose, right? I've actually
Mhm.
avoiding violence in the long run, talking about
Yeah,
how
you
bad it
could.
was in the past.
They left all the daggers around, but it didn't work. So they actually go for the kill.
Hmm. The book is rich with anecdotes like that, which only makes sense if you read the whole book and you try to patch it all together. The maybe I'll leave with I'll end with something about um, I think what he summarizes as the logic of risk taking. So there's a section in the book that talks about why you should love certain risks and why you should be careful with others. And the classic anecdote of that is, I think he talks about a concept called ergodicity. And to illustrate that, this is where basically we're criticizing social sciences and how probability is calculated, because classic example is there's a difference between 100 people going to a casino once and one person going to casino 100 times. So often the way things are represented
That poor guy.
yeah, because that's the difference between path dependency. Because if you are a single person going to the casino once, you have 100% chance of ruin in the long run. Versus if you're part of a cohort, an ensemble of people, of 100 people, you can actually win $1 million through that one slot machine and leave, and you get to keep it. So that's the difference between path-dependent probabilities and ensemble probabilities. And that's something I think very interesting very, very important to know. Why it kind of explains um, why there's this kind of not grandma instinct or grandma way of making decisions. I don't remember exactly how he calls it. There's this millenary wisdom, right, about being afraid of tail risks. It's like, you don't want it to
Extreme risks. Yeah.
happen to you. That's what you want to avoid. Exactly. You want
Sure.
to avoid the risk of ruin, complete ruin, while still maintaining the potential upside. So in life, what you have to do is kind of create options for
Interest.
yourself. Yeah, options for yourself to win big, but
Useful.
minimize the downside risks. It actually explains why people are afraid of vaccines to some extent. They're just kind of afraid of being that one, in a 1 in a million person that dies from it. And there's something
Sure.
in our bodies that just has this tendency of being really afraid of very, very low probability risks that can really wipe you out. And it's something probably that is passed on from generation to generation, part of it genetically, part of it in our culture. What you should do, and this is the example of positive risk taking, is the example of exercise. So if you just do squats every day, That's very low intensity damage for very low damage for your brain. What it actually does is that it kills part of your muscles, right, cells, and
Yeah.
enables you to get stronger. But if you do the same thing and you jump from second floor, you're gonna injure yourself quite badly or die.
Squat from the second floor. That's great.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
so it's very important to take the right risks, knowing that you're going to suffer some small damage. The idea of sacrifice is really important,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's what the extrapolation to nothing worthwhile pursuing is without sacrifice. And all the major religions talk about offerings of sacrifice, right? If you want to aim for anything that has high purpose, you have to sustain some injuries, one way or
Yeah.
another. And he marries the two concepts quite elegantly. And
So he, because he talks a lot about social sciences, from what you told me.
Mhm.
Does he predict anything, or does he talk about the replication crisis, or is that too modern?
When you say the replication crisis, which one do you mean?
Well, there's the whole replication crisis going on right now, and social scientists, also in other sciences as well, but
Ah,
social
yeah.
sciences
I mean, he's
impacted.
got a YouTube channel, I think, just criticizing how scientific papers
Yeah,
are completely
and
bullshit
yeah,
and flawed and cannot be reproduced
yeah,
themselves,
and
right?
yeah, that's essentially it, right?
Yeah.
And for those who don't know, it's like the growing number of studies, oftentimes seen as keystone studies, studies that everyone knows, and it's defining, turn out to be wrong. They cannot be replicated, meaning that the methodology, the data collection that was done, when you do it again, you get completely different results. So suddenly, everything that we know about that area is questionable. It's like the king is naked type of moment. Anyway, I don't want to derail the conversation. There's a lot
No, but
about that as
it
well.
is covered in the book. I think in page 100, 215. It's really, this is a probability discussion that I'm not an expert on because I'm just an
Sure,
amateur. But it's the difference between
classic amateur.
shooting at a target in a very dispersed manner where your
Sure,
variance is zero and being slightly off from the target, but still close enough. What happens in
yeah.
social sciences is that you
One
get
is bias, other
amazing,
one is
amazing,
variance.
amazing averages, right? But then if you cannot, it's so it's basically chaos. It's just a random distribution. If you look at it in detail at a sufficiently large sample size. The problem is that if I understand correctly, the replicability crisis, the sample sizes are not adequate to make normal distribution inferences on them, and that's what creates this inability to replicate them. To give an example, and I think this is a great way of ending it, um, his rule of thumb is never cross a river that is on average 4 feet or say 1 meter deep, if it's just on average. Um,
Yeah,
because
more like
you might
typical,
find
right?
yourself that you start off with 20 centimeters, right, and then soon enough you're in 2 meter water. Uh, so this is a convexity problem, and it's basically the hidden risk of looking at averages and not seeing basically your the whole distribution, right, of your
Sure.
potential risk, and that's your tail risk
So,
right there in the 2 meter deep water, which is a great rule of thumb to follow in life.
thumb, that's not 2 meter. You need a whole arm, or even more arms. Um, I think moving forward, you can be the science guy in the Classic Amateurs podcast, because you definitely cover much more number heavy, smart, reasonable, down to earth topics. I'm all about spaceships and monsters. So and
There's merit in thinking about that as well. I think as we live
yeah,
this interesting future that's happening today, but yeah, just I think there's so much to learn from this book, Nassim Taleb, and I can recommend the whole collection. And I might do another one on the other books, but I think I'll leave you with kind of his moral advice ultimately, which is what is in light of what I just said and all the bullshit and the ability to be fooled by the world, and making poor decisions. How should you conduct yourself in the world? We spoke about, not trusting people that don't have skin in the game. acknowledging that people, that make sacrifices are worthy of being trusted more than those that don't, and yeah, play bets that are in your favor in the long run. Don't go to the casino too many times in a row, and just be virtuous, which according to Taleb is take risks. So don't engage in virtue signaling, don't engage in rent seeking, which is kind of the banking problem that we spoke about at the beginning. And ultimately, if you want to be virtuous, take risks. But if, to him, it's basically start a business. He sees that as the ultimate virtue, because if you put yourself on the line, you can actually help. And especially if you put yourself on the line in serving not only yourself, but say your outer circle, your family, your community, tribe, country, humanity, whatever, that's the ultimate good, right? Which is very, very good message to try to follow.
The modern 10 commandments. Amazing.
Being revised.
Exactly. So what I learned from this is that, trust a guy who looks homeless but has the certification. And obviously don't go to the casino too many times.
The Twitter CEO, right? Doesn't he look like Rasputin or something? They look pretty,
I don't know,
pretty shabby. Or the founder of Atlassian, to take an Australian example, right? He's always wearing this t-shirt.
I did meet the CEO. I'm not going to say the name of the company that looked complete homeless and hipster, and he's a multimillionaire guy, and he's surrounded by hot chicks. So I imagine they also follow your author's advice and go for the homeless guy. So it's good, awesome. Thank you so much for introducing me to this book. I'll definitely check it out. Anything else to say before we wrap up?
No, it's good. I think it should be required reading once a year, together with all the other classics.
The same book once a year. All right. Cheers. Have a good evening. Thank you.
Yeah, you too. Great talking to you.
Bye-bye.